Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Ray Rossini, and joining me for the second week in a row is Mr. Matt Topper. I hope everybody's doing awesome. This is another episode of MSP Community Live, episode number 2. How you feeling after the first episode, Matt?
I'm feeling good. It went well. We talked about some relevant topics, and it's just good to get out there in the community and have these kind of discussions. What's not good is while the intro was playing, Mets lost, so they are going into the All Star break 7 games under 500. So fantastic way to start the show off there.
Yeah, I'm not much of a baseball fan. I like playing the sports. I'm not so much about watching the sports. It's like watching paint dry for me. So, um, but my sympathies, I guess. I'm more a contact sport kind of guy. So football, hockey, a little bit of basketball, depending on who's playing. But we're not here to talk about sports ball. We're here to talk about MSP life. And
We are.
yeah, and I want to touch base on things we've done over the past week. We're going to cover some stories. We talked about some top threads on Reddit and some conversations on Geek. But definitely, how you doing? Any interesting stuff happened during the week?
Not too much. It's kind of an interesting week. You got to see who took the whole week off and who came into the office at all. So really just weird scheduling wise. You got a lot of out of office messages, especially Wednesday morning. Couple of interesting things happening in my world. Just we're making progress on some of the podcast stuff we're doing and some interesting interviews, and just really excited to see the engagement and the enthusiasm that's been out there for some of the content we've made and some of the interest in talking. But I think the big story, as far as noteworthy, newsworthy items, is one of the topics that you're talking about today, which is the anniversary, the 2-year anniversary of the reality check that the Kaseya incident was. That came to mind from a couple of conversations, not just because we talked about maybe talking about it today. It was everywhere. I heard this from multiple people I talked with that just brought that up to remind me that yes, it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, Tom Lawrence wrote up a post on it this past week. I remember that Friday stuff. We're all preparing for the long weekend because it was actually going to be a weekend for the 4th, which was nice. And yeah, things didn't go so well. I don't want to compare it to. I absolutely don't want to compare it to any of the horrific things that have happened that are touch points in human history. But for MSPs, this is absolutely, it's that point that you're going to remember 10 years from now and be like, I was doing this, right? So in that sense, it's not the same as, any of the horrible events that have happened in history, but just like then, I know what I was doing during 9/11. Like I know what I was doing in important times in history. That event 2 years ago kind of stands out of my mind too. Do you remember what you were doing and when you first heard about it?
Yeah, it's actually a good story. This was back when Matt Lee and I were still working at the same company at the same time, and we were in a meeting together when this started popping up and hearing about things. And so, first of all, you can imagine being in a meeting with Matt. I wasn't getting too many words in anyway, and
He's a little boisterous, right? Love Matt
so
Lee.
it was those are always interesting.
Yeah.
But we just kind of looked at each other and virtually through the Zoom call, and just had one of those, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening moment. And I talked about this in one of my sessions at Secure, and we were able to take that and turn it into a what happens if this is us next time, right? I know the immediate reaction is very likely to be, man, thank God we're not using Kaseya, but it turned into, I want to say, a positive for us in that we said, let's think about what happens when this is us. But that's what we were doing. We were just in a department level meeting and talking about it, and like, man, this is real. What were you doing?
I was doing my usual bouncing around between communities, right? And I was talking in a group with some Huntress people, and yeah, Stephen brought up, yeah, and that's why I was very, very cautious about what I said and how I was framing it, because the last thing I want is somebody saying I'm comparing 9/11 to the Kaseya breach. Abso-freaking-lutely not. I'm just saying as a point in time that you remember.
Yeah.
So I figure when I saw that, Steven joined just afterward. When he says I was just in class
It did
in high
sound like
school.
that.
I'm like, that's probably not 2 years ago. Um, but no, I was in a chat with some Huntress guys, and the usual Slagle, Tom Lawrence, Ernest Murray, and we're talking, and suddenly I forget who from Huntress starts popping it up. Did you guys see this? And the information starts coming in, and it was very much. There's no way this is like, because in the beginning there wasn't a whole lot of information, right? There was
No,
some
no.
warnings in the beginning that stuff could happen over the weekend. There was, but we say that every weekend, and especially long weekends, and suddenly there were inklings. Did you hear this story? But it was a lot of anecdotal stuff. It was a lot of, I saw something in a Facebook group, I saw something in a
Yeah.
DM. It wasn't anything public yet. Um, and I can only imagine. I mean, we've heard the stories from Robert Chaffee. We've heard the stories from tons of people that were actually affected by it, directly affected by it. And it was insane. The From that time, and if anybody watches Huntress and the way they work, whenever there's an inkling of anything, they go into like red alert mode, and I'm sure they have their hackerish terminology, and I'm sure Matt, as a veteran security guy, I'm sure you could describe what it is, but it was information, and suddenly, like, these guys don't sleep for 72 hours at
Yeah.
minimum.
Yeah.
I look at it like when I was at the police department and we had like the hurricanes or the Elian Gonzalez stuff going on. Like, we were Alpha Bravo, we were working 24, 48, 72-hour shifts. There was no
Oh,
question.
yeah.
Yeah. And so just looking at the stuff pop up, and because of the access, these guys were popping up stuff, guys and girls popping up stuff maybe a few hours before you were seeing the posts on Reddit start to show up, and the posts in the other forums start to show up. And it was crazy watching it unfold. And it went from, no, this is, well, right? Like, you work at a major vendor now, like, and you've seen it in the space before. Somebody will say, I'm using Screen Connect as an example. My Screen Connect got hit, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, there's this major bug and this major breach, and then you look into it and it's just one dude had something misconfigured or
Oh, I know,
over
right?
blew things
It's
out.
so
It
it
happens.
takes, yeah, and it takes a while before you realize, and the industry as a whole realizes there's something really going on here. It's not just one guy got popped and is blowing it out of proportion. You know, first
Yeah,
guy who gets hit, the assumption is they misconfigured something, and even the first couple, it's, oh, there's a lot of
yeah.
aggressiveness because it's the holiday weekend, and then it starts to crystallize that this is a
It's just
coordinated thing.
more and more and more, and I think it took Kaseya 48 hours to shut everything down in the cloud.
Yeah,
It was something like that. Yeah, Job Technology says, I was 6 months into running my full-time MSP. I didn't get Kaseya because I don't. I'm glad I didn't get Kaseya because I'm glad I didn't know what I would have done. And I can only imagine, right, like what these guys went through. And Steven's exactly right. I mean, anybody's at risk of getting popped. There's zero question. Best of circumstances. I mean, and so that's why we say this, not, oh, you screwed up what you could have done. And yes, there was. I'll leave it up to you guys to go back, because obviously, even though Matt is not biased, he does work for a competitor, so I don't want to put him in that spot. But you can go back to look at the history at what could have been done differently. There's always something that could have been done differently, and that's why we look at these things to learn, right? Like, as far as the MSP, I know one MSP that came out of it, and now he has hard copies of all the critical passwords in a safe.
exactly.
I'm like, and that's part of his SOP. And like, those things, I don't know if I'm there, you know what I mean, as far as concerned, but I also wasn't directly hit. So, if my house had gotten broken into, I'd probably be looking through it in a different lens. You know what I mean?
But
Um,
you brought up the perfect point there, in that, yes, I work for a competitor now, but that could have just as easily been us, and it would be
oh yeah,
naive of me to say it couldn't be. And so when I was on the MSP side, what we said was, okay, let's do some internal tabletopping and say, okay, let's assume this was us that got hit, and whether it's a vuln or whether it's one of my privileged admins used a terrible password and got his phone stolen or whatever. Like, just go for the assumption there's someone privileged in your RMM. How does that impact us now? What would we do? And what should we be doing differently so that when it does happen, we're not hit, right? And so that gets into things like decisions around, do you have your internal stuff in your RMM? Do you have different access, right? Where is the dividing wall? Just how to structure things so that this is minimized, so that when it is us, when it is whatever RMM platform you're using, that you're ready, that you know what you're going to do, and it's not just everyone kind of running around with, the proverbial chicken with head cut off, and trying to figure out what to do. At the very least, you've had a conversation, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of MSPs that I know started having that response. Now, Slagle tells me that it's confirmation bias, that I'm just talking to the security mature MSPs, and that may be true, right? I tend to hang out in
Mhm.
those circles. But for all of us as an industry, it's just a fantastic. It's hard to call it an opportunity, but in some ways, if you want to have a silver lining over this whole thing, it's a wake up call of the reality that this kind of thing can happen, and those of us shouting from the rooftops, "Hey, RMM is a force multiplier and an issue there." Uh, don't want to say validation necessarily, but it can happen, right? It's not just a theoretical, a hypothetical attack. So in that sense, there is something good to have come out of it.
Yeah, and that's, Job Technology says it best. He's saying, and I put the link in the chat, so if anybody wants to go look back, this is the retrospective. Ooh, that's horrible. That's the retrospective Tom Lawrence did a few days ago, so about a week ago, talking about the events and the timeline, and it was exactly that. And it's having the it's looking at it and saying, not, oh wow, you screwed up. It's, what would I have done? What do we have in place in this exact situation? What could we do better? Um,
Yeah.
and in that case, if you go to it, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the security guy here, I'm the network engineer. Um, but you look at things through the lens of, every one of my tools could absolutely be popped, and item by item, what would I do should this happen? Right? Is that
Yeah.
just pretty? I mean, there's a lot more to it, but at its core, that's basically what it boils down to.
The way I like to describe it is for everything you can think of, just go in and start asking yourself what happens if questions, and have an answer. Even if the answer is bad, and even if the answer is going to take us 6 months to recover from this, at least have the conversation and have the answer. Um, ooh, that's a really good comment. The one
What
Steven
is
just
too
posted.
secure? Yeah, I'll bring that up now. So Stephen asked, "What is too secure? Is it going back 3 or 4 people having the keys to the castle?" And I want to bring up a quick point here. I didn't want to interrupt you, but to this end also, a lot of us plan on, and this was my takeaway from the Kaseya incident. A lot of us plan on, what would we do if something happened? But there's a point before that where you get that notice of something odd occurring, where you need to qualify, what is it? How wide is it? How many people are affected? Is this a real thing? Right? We refer to those internally as major incidents. Um,
Mhm.
and so we have qualification factors for major incidents, but you got to plan for that too. So because between doing something, you got to figure out how you're going to get on the field before you pick up a bat and get on home plate and start
Yeah.
swinging, right? Like, and I'm sorry. So you were saying, like, what is too secure? What is too much?
It's different for everyone, right? So when I was having this conversation, when this Kasei incident happened, I was at a sizable organization, and so we were able to do pretty significant separation of duties, to the point to where none of our individual, even admin accounts, had full access to everything. And so even if my account got popped, you'd have to get into Matt's account too to be able to do something significant. Things like that. At a smaller scale, you can't necessarily do that at an individual level, but you can then think, okay, do I separate things by account, right? So everyone, I'm sure, has their daily driver and their admin accounts. There's
Mm,
nothing that says you can't have three, right? Maybe
right.
your privileged RMM account is totally separate and you're only allowed to log into it from this one VDI desktop, or just things like that. And that's not necessarily a recommendation or a prescription, but think about how you can limit the blast radius, right? If one of your accounts or one of your systems gets compromised, what can you do to limit the impact that that has? And at the very least, if you don't get to that point, identify what the impact is, right? Is this something that you have risk to reading client data? Maybe it's a backup system, but can't execute anything. Or is it something that can modify, right? A great example is a lot of antivirus consoles have the ability to send command lines to endpoints, and you wouldn't necessarily think
And
about that until you
that's
start going
becoming a
down the
thing
road.
with a lot of tools, right? Like that's not
Right,
just,
right.
I remember WebRoot. I remember my first thought, this was what, 5, 6 years ago when they first added, like you could run commands from it. Um, and it's not just WebRoot. That's not what he's calling it. There's a lot of AVs today that have that ability. But when you start looking at the tools you have, there's a lot of tools that have that functionality. I remember looking at WebRoot. I'm like, this is awesome. If we ever get locked out, I never need to restart. We use Control, Screen Connect, whatever you want to call it. If I ever needed to restart that agent, or I need to restart the lab check agent or whatever, having an extra set of access, because in the networking world, having out of band access is a normal thing. Like having extra sets, belt and suspenders, you know, two is one is none kind of thing. So I thought it was great. And then after the Kaseya event, I'm like, maybe that's not such a great. I mean, I wasn't using WebRoot anymore, but still,
Yeah,
other
yeah.
tools have the same tools, right? Like other tools have this.
Sentinel-1 has that.
Yeah, and so you don't think about that stuff, and it's just one of those things that I'm just like, wow. Um, did it, because you were still at, it was Iconic back then, right? That you were still working for.
Yes, yes.
So even though you weren't using Kaseya, did you go back with Matt and whoever else on the team and reevaluate your tools anyway, just in case?
Oh, yeah, we had weeks of meetings on this and significant architecture changes as a result. And we had already been doing a lot of separation of duties and things like trying to separate out the different offices and regions and accounts and things. But then we really said, let's start from my account or my admin account. I had like 4 or 5 different accounts, and so did Matt. And let's assume that those get compromised. What we do to limit blast radius there, and that can be things like the access to run a command behind the scenes, like in the EDR product that is
Right.
behind something only a break glass account can do. Even our daily driver or our admin accounts couldn't do that. And really just start iteratively having those what happens if questions. It's kind of become a catchphrase for me. You just as many as you can think of, and whatever threat vectors that you can think of or ways that this is going to be abused, keep doing it, and start with the easy low hanging ones, like your help desk techs have access to the admin console, and just go from there. And my big advice there is to not start with the exotic esoteric scenarios that are like cool and interesting.
Mhm.
Start with the low ones, like our level 1 techs have access to the entire product kind of stuff. That's what's going to get you. And of course, remembering all of this, that in Kaseya's
Yeah.
case was a 0 day anyway, not a privilege or misconfiguration. And there's only so much you can do on that, but still be prepared.
But I love that, because, and that's kind of why, like, I listen to it now and I hear Jay Tipton or Robert Chaffee talk on it, and they're still doing talks on this stuff regularly, and in addition to other stuff, they have plenty of topics to talk about. But I see this happening over and over. And if I was an MSP, if I didn't have the benefit of the overview of being an RMSP moderator, um, I would look at it as, and I used to be guilty of this. I apologize. I used to be, I used to do the, oh, and again, do we have to hear this again? Right. But
Right.
looking through it in the eyes of, what you and I see every day, it's not the stories being repeated. You also got to remember there's people that never saw that, right? Like we saw this with
Yeah.
NCE. We
Yeah.
saw this, where there was dozens of, NCE is probably the most obvious example, where there was dozens of posts prior to NCE taking place the first, second, or third time or fourth time, and there were still questions afterward. I lost my licensing, or why are they trying to renew for X amount? And and that's why these stories are so important, because when you do it repeatedly, you never know who's going to hear it for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no repository of, let's hear Robert talk about this one more time, you know. um yeah, and of course the compliance guy, ensuring service accounts are least privileges. But that goes back to
Or that you have service accounts.
You don't even have service accounts? You just like don't believe in it, or
No, I mean,
oh,
we've run into organizations all the time that,
oh yeah, yeah.
put the admin account in the service password or something, or like
Oh,
the copier writing to the SMB share as administrator.
and it doesn't take much. It takes just the slightest amount of inconvenience, right? Like you, even if you create that service account and then you forget it's set up for like password expiration, and you're like, and it expires, that's enough to make forget it. I'll just give it a domain admin account and call it a day. Like,
Right, right.
you shouldn't. Please don't. Please don't. But
We've
it
all seen it.
happens. You know what I mean? It's going back to, I guess, 2 weeks in a row. I'll say it. Benjamin Franklin said, "You can have security or convenience, but not both." Um, and I think with today's tools, there's probably a better middle ground than there ever was before.
I think the spectrum is wider, right? So
Yes,
I think the exercise exists, and it's actually worthwhile to literally draw a spectrum or a line when talking about this, and say, look, decision makers, we need to be somewhere on this continuum. And I think what's happening is that um, you don't have to at the security side, you're not sacrificing quite as much on convenience anymore, but you're still making a decision on where to be on that, because the all the way on the secure side is still to unplug everything.
right.
And you want to get a little further away than that, than just how much convenience are you willing to give up. And some of the things we talked about, like having second logons, right? I had to carry around like a whole keyring full of YubiKeys for a while, and that's an
Oh,
inconvenience.
oh, absolutely. And that's kind of the thing, though. It's like, but it goes back to what's too secure, because okay, I'm an owner. I can be one of those guys to say I need access to absolutely everything. And what I've learned in my years, as I've got a little older, a little milder, is I need access to get access to everything if I need it. I absolutely don't need it at fingertips reach, right? Like that, those are very
Yeah.
two different things. I need to be able to get the access, get to a break glass account should I need to, right? I need unencumbered access should something happen, but the hell if I need access to it every day. The hell if I even need to have that information until I need it. Um, and that's the hard thing to get over, like especially going into our second conversation here. There was and I'm trying to find it because we did jinx it. We were joking about all the repetitive posts that we get
I know, I
over and
know.
over again, and that was my fault. I jinxed it. But there was a post of, I'm a brand new MSP, and what do I need to start? How do I get my first client? What RMM should I pick? We saw all of this in the last week after I jinxed it, so I apologize to everybody. But I absolutely, in my earlier years, especially when I was a one-man MSP and then a two-person MSP and so on and so forth, it was very easy to say I absolutely need everything because, yeah, I was doing everything.
Yeah, you were doing the actual work.
Right.
I shouldn't say actual work, but
No.
hands-on engineering work.
No, I don't think anybody would disagree with you saying I don't do actual work today. But but it's a thing. Like I don't need Screen Connect I keep going to Screen Connect because it's one of my favorite products. But Screen Connect admin access, I don't need that daily. I don't need my lab tech or whatever RMM or PSA. Like I don't. We tell people don't run under admin privileges. That's a no-brainer. We say it over and over again, and then you ask the average MSP, okay, but do you have admin access to your tools? And when they say
Yeah.
yes, it's the same thing. It's the
Right, their daily drivers like a super admin in their RMM tool. Like, okay, well, technically you're not running, you'd be better off running as local admin than doing that.
yeah. So whatchamacallit. So Tim asks a question before we get into that new one. Do owners really need access? I can say no. I say I don't need immediate access. I'll say it from my perspective. I need to be able to go get the access without anybody blocking me should all things go to hell. Now, let me ask the security guy. This is literally your world. What if you're securing my organization, what are you telling me?
So we did the same thing. We did. So Matt and I had admin accounts. None of our owners did. The executive above us, Tony Miller, had a break glass admin account, and it was actually a very complicated procedure to use it, involving multiple people. And one person had the key pass database, and somebody else had the password to it, and all that kind of stuff. So what they need is a way in, and not for the if we I mean I guess you could have fired both of us, but if we both get hit by a bus, or we're on the same plane and it crashes, or anything could happen, and they need a way in. So if you're an owner that's reached the point where you're not doing hands-on engineering work anymore, you need a way in. You don't need a way in day to day.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, that's absolutely a thing. So actually, instead of talking about that new MSP one, did you see this one that was one man MSP after year one? Did you get a chance to read that one?
I'm reading it right now because you put it on the screen.
Fair enough. So the TLDR, I'll go over the highlight points here, and let me put the link in the chat, because that's what we're doing. So the TLDR, I decided to quit my job as director of IT a year ago. Built my client list. I didn't build my client list as quickly as I thought I would be. That's not a unique thing, so no worries there. And he had some personal issues. Absolutely, sorry to hear it, but it happens. But he's looking forward to building out and expanding his business in 2024. He lists a bunch of providers he's using. What I think is more interesting than what providers he's using is actually talking about what his experiences are. So he goes talking about his different tools and seeing, what talking about his different experiences on how the tools work for him and how they could be better for him. Um, but then he comes back, and the whole point of this post is to sit there and ask, what do you guys use? What should I change anything? It's that peer review, right? And so talking about that, I think that's a big difference between the average new MSP and somebody who's been running a business for a little bit. The person that's been running a business knows to look for other data points and other points of opinions, and talk to peers. And I give him kudos for sharing his experience, him or her, I don't know who it was. Give
Yeah.
them kudos for sharing their experience, but um I do wonder, like, how much better would it have been if before they started this, they read through all the articles there on our MSP, or joined MSP Geek, or joined MRU, and just listen for a little bit, have the conversations before starting the business, before giving up his job. Um, what do you see? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Carefully thinking how to answer this question.
It's because okay,
I do have an answer.
okay, go ahead, man.
So what I think he's realizing is something that you also have, and all of us who have been in mature organizations realize, and that is that the tool itself is a tool, and it's not your way of life. It's not a forever choice necessarily. And if there's a better one that comes out that makes more sense for the way that you're operating, then there's no reason to be forever married to what you picked in the first place. And it's simply a way to get whatever objectives you have that need done. And I give this poster credit for asking the question, am I using the right thing? Now, there's another side to this. There is also our tool side. That means, okay, don't spend all of your time worrying about your stack,
Right.
right? I sometimes get frustrated at the word stack because of just how tunnel vision we can get on our choice of tooling in this industry.
Yeah.
And for whatever choice you want to make of RMM or PSA or whatever, obviously, use ConnectWise because I'm the ConnectWise guy. But whatever
You're
you're
literally paid
using,
to say that. So, we're
right?
in transparency. These put, but we don't hide that. And that
It's
was
kind of
one of
tongue in
our.
cheek, right?
It's tongue in cheek, and that's. I don't think you would pause for even half a second before telling somebody, use the right tool for you. So,
Yes.
but we're
Use the
trying.
right tool for you.
Since it's a new show, I want to be as upfront as humanly possible, even though it might be a little cringy at some point. You're like, Ray, shut the hell up. We know he works for ConnectWise,
Yeah,
but I just
we
want to
know
put
it.
that out there.
But if you're using something, chances are whatever you're using can accomplish what you're trying to do. And if you're spending so much time worrying about this perfect stack, the perfect stack doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There's no perfect product for anyone. And if you were using one vendor one day and another vendor the other day, chances are you can still do what you need to do, right? There's a base set of support and features and all of that. And, take ticketing, for example, get your tickets in and get your invoices out and spend more time worrying about how to invoice more and less time worrying about the minutia of each individual little product feature, right? It's not, that's not, we're not in business to use tools. We're in business to service clients. And sometimes because we're techs, we just get so focused on the technology. And so that is one thing I do give that poster credit for kind of looking around and saying, hey, maybe I'm using the right thing, maybe I'm not, and at least asking the question. And I hope that it's simply a, am I using the right thing, and not a, I need to pivot all of a sudden.
Yeah, Tim brings up an excellent point. He says, "What's in your stack? Humans."
Mm,
And I wish I would have seen, and maybe you're seeing something I'm not, but at least the posts and the threads and the stuff and the different forums I've seen, there's a million questions a week on, exaggerating of course, but on which tool should I use for this thing, because let's be, we're digital mechanics, we love
yeah.
tools. Like my dad was an ASE mechanic, and he loved, he probably had 15 10 millimeter wrenches at, at some point. Now to be fair, 10 millimeter disappears all the time, but the point is we love tools, right? Like we love that stuff. I wish I would see in the communities more questions on, I'm hiring a technician, what characteristics does the technician
Yeah.
need to have? Or I'm
Yeah.
hiring my first marketing person, what kind of characteristics or goals, or like if we spent that much time, we've poured all over, different feature comparison lists. And I said, Matt, do me a favor, I'm going to get a new AV. You would have no problem whatsoever building out a grid of the features you absolutely need, the tools you're going to evaluate, how you evaluated, what the feedback was, so you can make a data-driven decision. And I would argue every MSP on the planet is capable of doing that. But when
Hmm.
you hire the people, the ones using the tools, it's far harder to change your human than it is to change your PSA. You know
No
what I mean?
kidding.
Like, I wish I would see that. Um, do you see people asking those questions anywhere?
One place I have seen them at Evolve meetings, or
Okay.
HTG before that.
And the Evolved meetings being a peer-driven group of accountability with, because the people are working on their businesses, one would guess that they're a little more evolved, a little more operationally mature. you
It's
know,
also part of a composition, right? So you are more likely to have owners and execs in those groups, than some of the communities we're in that are more technical driven. Just it's very interesting. We talk about the communities take on characteristics, and just for whatever reason, some of the groups we're in tend to be tech focused, and HTG Evolve is more owner exec focused, and they're talking more about those kind of it. Now, of course, the tool thing still comes up for sure,
oh yeah,
right? There's endless conversations about it, but you're more likely there to have a discussion about um, what type of characteristics were more business oriented problems. And Ray, do you want to talk about other peer groups before everyone thinks I'm pushing the
no,
ConnectWise peer group?
so we joined, there's tons of peer groups out there. Look, I did it as an MSP. I did the Chartech, I did the True Methods, I did the C level, I did, you name it, I did it at some
Yeah.
point in time. Absolutely. um and you know what, I will liken it to, uh, peer groups is very much like marketing. There's tons of marketing, sales and marketing, quote unquote gurus out there, right? Um, whether it's your vendors telling you how to sell and market, whether it's Robin Robbins or True Methods, or Chris Weiser's group. There's tons of them out there, and my personal opinion, and obviously we all have opinions on what we like and what we don't like. That's not the point here. The point is,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, just the fact that you're doing something is better than nothing. And so when you apply a sales and marketing structure or format to what you're doing, and you're doing it repetitive, over and over again, uh, you're going to get some form of results. And regardless of the quality of the results, it's probably a lot damn better than what you were getting before with nothing. And so the peer groups are exactly that. Now, obviously, there's technician led peer groups, there's business owner led peer groups, there's sales executive peer groups. I know a friend of mine runs a SaaS owner peer group. Like, there's peer groups of all styles, but the fact that somebody's dedicating time on a regular basis to do them, right, whether it's the 1 week of Evolve per quarter, or whether
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
the Chartech asked you to go out once a year over to Bakersfield or whatever it is, right? The fact that you're doing it and you're actually spending time on it, I think that's what actually counts.
For
Um,
sure. The
you know,
structure, right?
the
Forcing
structure.
yourself to iterate over
Yeah.
these. We have a
So
good example, right? How many times in the past month have I asked you some question about video lighting or
yeah,
production? And like, it just
exactly.
doesn't matter. Can you see me and can you hear me? Is what's most important. See, even I still do it. I get focused on the minutia and the tools when I should be worrying about what we're saying more than anything.
You know what I think the difference is? I think because we're technical, and Glenn said it, talking about, let me see if I can find the comment. He thinks most MSPs are driven by a technician, not by a business person. I had the benefit of being both, but I think what happens is because the average technical person doesn't have the business acumen or training, it's easy to fall back to the thing you know and understand, right?
Yeah.
You and I,
Yeah.
as technical people, know and understand technology, and maybe RGB lighting, and I gave you that breakdown of stuff and like, the light points and stuff like that. But, it may have been stuff you hadn't heard before, but you have the knowledge and background that it made sense. It clicked for you when you did it and you were able to apply it in your own way. And you have a very beautiful background now that I think is fantastic. If anybody wants to see what it looked like before, go to the MMN Discord. um, you know, while we were talking about it. But I think tools are the same thing. It's easy for us.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to fall into that because we understand we need remote PowerShell monitors, or we understand we need backstage access, or, event driven or trigger driven, or, cloud driven, whatever. We understand those topics. Now, when you start talking about, above the line or below the line financials, and, it starts to get fuzzy, and the average MSP is like, no, I'll go back to the thing I understand. Um,
Yeah.
which I don't
I
think
had
is
to
a
learn business after the fact.
yeah, we all well, I can't say we all did. I had the benefit of I had amazing parents that were entrepreneurs also, so I got that from a young age. So besides having my technical background, I had owned several businesses before I started my MSP. Um, maybe it's why I see it a little more, why it's a little more glaring to me, maybe because I see this stuff and I'm like, I can see how I could have made that mistake. I was fortunate enough not to. I made other mistakes, so many other mistakes, but
Well, we all did. No, it's so true. The small organization I was with before Iconic was fortunate to have been started by a partnership with someone who was business focused first and someone who is technical on the other side of it. And, it was from day one, not a technical person trying to figure out business. It was just them trying to figure out how to work together. And, we had one guy doing all the financials and business stuff and the other guy doing stuff, doing the
yeah.
work. And, not everyone has that benefit.
No, no, I will say, I think it's harder to learn business than it is technology. Not because one subject is harder than the other, and definitely not that I don't think MSPs, technical people, can learn business. We have thousands of examples of that, really successful MSPs that did start from technicians and build up. The difference is, I think, the amount of sales, marketing, and business information that's out there. I think it's so vast, it can become learning to swim in the ocean. That's
Yeah.
really complicated. And while there's a million resources out there for MSPs on the technical side, it's far smaller than, there's no Gary V book on RMMs. That doesn't exist. You know what I mean? Like,
I do. I
maybe
do.
it should. Maybe it should. Who knows? But maybe, maybe you'll start doing one. Make, you'll write your
It's
next
so
business book.
interesting, right? So you go to a bookstore, and I'm one of those people who prefers learning from Dead Tree Edition books as
Mhm.
opposed to, ebooks. You go to the business section at a bookstore, and two-thirds of it is just absolute junk that sells really well because somebody had a one paragraph idea that they turned into 200 pages. And it's so hard to filter that from the genuine, here are the fundamentals of how businesses operate, especially for me, right? I started as a tech. I had to learn all this stuff
Yeah.
as I went along. And right, I've always been an engineer first, and trying to figure that out after the fact, the only way I was able to do it was I had people who were, uh, mentoring me at the time who said, "Okay, that's junk. Go read that one." And yeah, this kind of works, but it's not how we work here. And it must be so difficult for someone who doesn't have that person to go ask that question to of,
Yeah.
where should I start? How should I navigate this?
It's funny because I remember, and I'm positive I made this comment to you directly, but excuse me, I've said it 1,000 times. Like, I started my MSP in 20, like my actual MSP in 2011. I've been doing network and IT consulting for decades, but the last iteration of it, Orsini IT, I launched in 2011. And while I went back and looked, and yeah, we discovered last week our MSP was there, um, a few years before Geek, MSP Geek. I didn't know it was there. I don't think I joined
Yeah.
Reddit until like 2014, 2015. And I'm looking at it, and I would often say, like, I wish I had these resources when I was starting, or at least I wish I had been aware of them when I was starting, because I was figuring stuff out on my own. And I did, now I have a cooling off period for my tools. So, for example, I had one PSA and RMM solution. I don't work for any of those vendors. I can say it. I had Autotask and N-Central for my PSA and RMM, and I think I was using FreshBooks for bookkeeping or something like that. And I was using it wasn't Log Me In. I was using definitely not TeamViewer. I was using somebody. It was Log. I think it was Log Me In actually.
They
Um,
were big for a long time.
they were
Probably
great,
was.
yeah. So I was using that, and 3 years later, I switched over to the Scam Suite, right? Which I lovingly call it. But and I used that all the way through 2020. I was a managed user. Um, but I had that 3-year cooling off period from 2011 to 2014. Like, I wouldn't let myself do something else. It wasn't for the pain of changing. I changed PSA and RMM within 30 days for both, and lit up Quozel the next month. It was just, I need to sit down and learn my tools and understand them before I can change them. So I know what I'm
Yes.
actually benefiting from when I move, right? I moved in 2019 to Salesforce for Manage. And in a lot of ways, I kind of wish I didn't, because I'm still an MSP at heart. I love, you know what I mean? I just love
Yeah.
Manage.
Yeah.
But we had turned Manage into an ERP. You know what I mean? And I was
Yeah.
doing a lot of stuff Manage was not built for, and we were using custom pods and custom pages, and and webhooks, and we were doing lots of stuff. And it was like, okay, we're probably at the edge of like what this thing is intended for. I'm making a hammer act like a screwdriver. Um, so it's Salesforce, but I had the benefit of 6, 7 years of Manage, so I knew exactly how I wanted to make Salesforce work, and I knew like what the downfalls were and what the benefits were, because I had that experience. And I think that's easier for MSPs, but that cooling off period makes a big difference. Did you guys ever have that as in your MSP days?
Not intentionally, only accidentally if we were in a contract with someone, kind of a forced cooling off period. But I do like that idea. It goes back to the concept we were talking about before, where, jumping from tool to tool immediately means you probably didn't spend the time to really learn how to use whatever it was. And kind of like what you were just talking about, you can make manage do whatever you needed it to do.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
maybe it was more efficient in Salesforce. And if you had just jumped immediately to Salesforce, then you might have not made that
Well,
choice
I'll
or
give a perfect
yeah,
example. Salesforce doesn't accommodate natively multiple addresses per account. You have to
right.
build that functionality. Having sites, having different addresses for an account in Manage, for example, or even Datto PSA, super easy. That is a normal thing. That is a everyday part of life. But Salesforce, who's technically the behemoth in the space, you got to build that out. It doesn't.
It's a platform.
I mean,
It is, and you have to know what you want, right? So
you
if you
have to
just
know.
go and start messing around, you are going to end up with a huge mess later that you probably have to tear down and start all
Oh
over,
yeah.
as opposed to what we like to say ConnectWise, start with the end in mind. And if you do that, then you at least have a chance of getting there with something like Salesforce. It's just so capable and so vast that you will not find it if you just start messing with things and building things.
So I want to get your opinion on two things Gary brought up specifically. Well, one thing Gary brought up. I can't find the comment, but he says, "I think Ray likes Star Wars." Yeah, I'm a little bit into Star Wars. You're absolutely right. And I'll take the minute to give a shout out to Tim's peer group. He has a peer group specifically for compliance. So I talked about sales, marketing. We talked about tech. Um, he's got a peer group for for compliance. So if that's your thing, if you like documentation, go join him. He's fun.
GRC.
There you go. But whatchamacallit? But Gary mentioned, what about MSPs that develop their own integrations and tools? And this is an interesting one. Before we get into this, before I get your perspective, and I'm keenly interested because you've been on all sides of this. You've been on the MSP side, you've been on the security side, you've been on the vendor side. So like the vendor side, you're absolutely building your own stuff. That's fair game. MSPs are just starting to build stuff, and I'd say more prevalent in the last 2 years. There's always been MSPs that build stuff. Hell, Manage came from an MSP.
Yeah.
Desk Director came from MSP. There's tons of tools that came from MSP. LabTech came from MSP. But nowadays, I think it's not the people that had some coding background or learned to solve a specific need. Now you have PIA, you have Roost, you obviously have Zapier or 8n8. You can do it with Microsoft tools. So MSP driven native proprietary tools and integrations, that's a lot more prevalent today. What's your take on that? Is it a stay in your lane? Is it a, like, as a security guy, I have to imagine you see it through a different lens than I do.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this, and I think there's two distinct types of audit or buildings that we just mentioned. One is the actual build your own custom stuff. So I used to do that. I had my own custom code all over the place at one point, and the thing is, I was the only dev in that organization, and so one, I didn't want to spend my entire life maintaining these solutions. And two, if I ever left that organization, as I eventually did, I didn't want to leave that organization with an unmaintainable custom thing that they relied on for parts of their business. So I actually tended to not build any of my own custom solutions. So I had plugins in LabTech that did stuff, and I had all sorts of. I see a comment that somebody built a BitLocker management plugin for Automate. I did the same thing. We probably should have worked together on it. That would have been right. We could have saved
It's
ourselves some
funny
time.
because we've talked about sharing scripts like at a large level, right? At a macro level.
Yeah.
We've talked about making those script repositories over and over again. And obviously, Kelvin shares his on the Cyberdrain website, on the Cyberdrain blog. You have Luke Whitelock. You have tons of people sharing their stuff. Gavin Stone, UK Gavin Stone, people sharing their stuff. But there's still never been that one repo of like everybody. And I know MSP Geek tried to do, they have something. MRU has something. I forget what the, I should know this. But there is a KB with stuff that people can add to. But how many times have you seen this where you built a solution, somebody else built a solution? I can only imagine like Michael Priest, right? One of the MSP Geek admins, and he wrote not 99 Pro, 99 Solution.
Yeah. He wrote the 9 solution.
Yeah, 99. Yeah, well, 99 Pro is their pro, is 99's thing. 99 Solution is his thing for the RMM. And I used that before I even knew who Michael Priest was. And I bet when he did it, a lot of MSPs are like, damn, I was kind of working on something like that too. Thank God it's there. You know what I mean? Or I'll just use my own thing.
I do know what you mean. I did something like that and said, man, this is way easier.
Yeah. And so I love seeing stuff like that. But and Tim's learning this stuff on the compliance, on the vendor side now, building out those tools. It's tough. But do you have more visibility from the security side on stuff you build? You know what the SBOM is, you know how it interacts. You don't get that with vendors. Does that affect your security posture or how you look at things?
I am always very, very hesitant to put any of my own code into my organization's production. Maybe it would be fine, but I'm always afraid that I will have missed something, or that there's some edge case that didn't come up, or that it'll just plain crash or do the wrong thing. And so I like to think of the forgotten leg of CIA, the availability leg. And I don't love running my own code in production. Now, PowerShell script, sure, totally fine. Actual compiled plugins, codes, things like that, not a huge fan of doing it yourself for a lot of reasons. If you're big enough and if you're a software dev shop, that's a different story. But if your core focus is helping SMBs and we're doing MSP work, then focus on that. Now, the that brings me to the other category we were talking about before, and that's things like your automation tools, right? Like your Roost or other RPA type tools. That is different. Do that all day long and write your own PowerShell scripts and do all that stuff all day long, but actually writing your own compiled tools, that for me personally, where I drew the line. I just don't trust myself enough, and it's funny because I don't trust myself enough. That might be a sign it's probably fine because I pay such close attention to it. But I never liked to run that kind of stuff. And I kind of cringe a little bit when I see something self-developed from an organization that's not really in the software development industry. That scares me a little bit as a security guy. I'm thinking, man, these guys are not coders. They're not whatever. Um, they're just doing something that got cobbled together to solve a problem once, and then it was there.
Yeah, I'm
Ray
still
said he's
here,
still
guys.
here.
For those that are worried, I'm just fixing my video, so so it does
Why would
not.
they be worried? They could hear me monologue about how I don't like running code for,
Yeah.
the next,
Well, you
what,
got this for the
6
next 30
minutes?
minutes. It's all you, man. Um,
I could
no,
talk about it for 30 minutes. We'd
I
be
know
out of
you could.
listeners by then.
That's actually your role over at ConnectWise, talking about this exact stuff. Yeah,
If you're a dev shop, then okay, but I wasn't, and it wasn't my core thing. And I have a pretty strong dev background, and I still don't like running my own code in production, and so just be conscious of what you're doing if you're going to write a custom tool. It
yeah,
goes back to the old "don't roll your own crypto" trope, and maybe expand that to other things.
yeah. Steve Gibson talks about that over and over and over again. Don't roll your own crypto, and then talking about the casualties of the people that have rolled their own crypto. It's like
Right?
there's good stuff out there. Like, what's the point? But then you have, exactly what exactly. I think it was Gary that mentioned it. You have something where the tools that are out there doesn't work. And it goes back to like that cooling off period we have. And Steven's one of my engineers. He'll call me on it if I'm full of shit. Um, but when it comes time to write stuff, like, and we have to write stuff, like there's no way we could integrate with as many tools as we have without writing some code. um, when we do it though, we have some engineers that are more comfortable in Python or PowerShell or Bash or Node or whatever. Like Node and PowerShell is my jam. Like in there I can live all day, I'm comfortable writing from scratch. um,
Yeah.
and all the JavaScript, derivatives, right? The Angular, the TypeScript, blah blah. That's not a big deal. But I have Steven who's comfortable in PowerShell and Bash and some other stuff, and I have other engineers that are more comfortable in Python. So when we're building tools, we make sure it's in something that at least two people know how to read and manipulate,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because if not, you're back to that bus problem, right? You're back to that one person, has to disappear because some emergency comes on, they can't function. And beyond that, I look at it from as a business owner, I want that person to have a quality of life. You know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
can't, how do you take off worrying that you're perpetually on call? Because if you built that one integration that ties your PSA to your licensing portal to actually provision new users, and you want to go take a vacation, new users happen to pop up, you're on call, buddy. Like, if you're the only
Yeah.
one, you're on call.
And you need more than one person to be able to do basic secure software development lifecycle stuff. Like, the person who writes it isn't the one who approves the commit.
Yeah. And actually, I do like Gary's comment, saying that he open sources his stuff specifically so others can run his code in production. Let them be the QA for Microsoft,
Right.
just like Microsoft did a couple of years ago.
Right. Let them find the bugs.
Yeah. No, I mean, but having open source, I have a lot of respect for those that can open source.
Yeah.
I have multiple repos with my stuff. One of my most pinged repo is a set of ConnectWise email templates for manage, because I ran them through Litmus and I got them done by a designer. So like, they fit all the different clients and stuff. Um, but you put that stuff out there specifically so you can share. Yeah, peer review in house, but if you can get that benefit of the whole, like we're talking about with Reddit, with the other communities, why not? Makes it a
Yeah,
little
of
bit better.
course.
unless you're going to sell it, and then that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, right. Totally different.
No
Because then you
idea
have to
what this
support
comment's
it.
in reference to, but do you have any idea what the I don't know what it is, Tim, but generally I agree with the stuff you say, so I'll just go with that. Um, dude, can you imagine it's 7:58 already?
No, actually,
That is the time has
this
flown.
flew.
Yeah. I will say thank you so much, dude. We're gonna have a series of rotating hosts and also some guests. Don't I absolutely will be pinging Slagle and Tom Lawrence and some other friends. And if you want to come on the show because you have something you want to talk about, hit us up on the Discord, on the MSP Media Network Discord. And that's where we're carrying the conversation throughout the week anyway. That's where we came up with these exact topics we were talking about. So go ahead and join us. Matt, thanks so much, dude. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you over on the Discord.